Welcome, everyone. I'm Sherry Ely. I'm the Program Director for Juvenile Justice with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And I oversee our Military Connected Families in the Courts project. And as part of that project, we are very fortunate to be able to bring this webinar to you today to talk about bridging the divide, MOUs and cross enforcement of MPOs and CPOs. And through our Military Connected Families in the Courts project, we've had the pleasure this past year of working with our friends at NOVA, the National Organization for Victim Advocacy. And they have designed this webinar, and we're so pleased that they have joined as faculty to present this information to you. We have Kimberly Henry and Dr. Ava Ramirez-Ene with NOVA, who are going to be talking to you today about MOUs and MPOs and CPOs, and we'll talk about what those acronyms are. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ramirez-Ene, and I will be moderating the chat for any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I am very excited to be here as a part of NOVA, the Advocating for Military Connected Survivors project. If you'd like to take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, tell us where you're joining from and your position, that would be great. Next slide, please. So here is our disclaimer slide. We do acknowledge that funding for this webinar is through the State Justice Institute, which we are very grateful. Next slide. And we are excited, as I said before, to be here with you all today to discuss military and civilian protective orders and really strengthening that military and civilian collaboration. Before getting started, who are we and why are we here? Next slide. So as I said, Dr. Ava Ramirez-Ene, I am a Marine Corps veteran and the Associate Director of Military Coordinated Community Response at NOVA. A little bit about me: during my active duty service, I also served in a secondary billet as a victim advocate in the military for military sexual assault survivors. And it was really this experience, along with my own lived experience, that really ignited my passion for serving and advocating for military connected survivors, vulnerable and high-risk populations. My area of focus is forensic psychology with a specialization in victimology. And I have a privilege of both working closely with both military and civilian systems to really improve how we respond to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And I'll pass it over to my colleague, Kim.
Yes, hello, thank you. I'm very excited to be here as well. My name is Kimberly Henry, and I'm a licensed master social worker. And here at NOVA, I'm the Military Coordinated Community Response Program Manager. I am also a Navy veteran, where I served 10 years in the Navy as a cryptologic analyst. But during my time of service, I was also a sexual assault victim advocate, where I really gained my passion for social work, particularly on the macro side, focusing on the policy and programs, which led me to becoming a sexual assault victim advocate for the U.S. Air Force as a DoD civilian, which ultimately led me here to NOVA, focusing on military programs and helping educate community advocates, legal personnel, law enforcement, like yourselves here today. So again, happy to be joining you.
Thank you, Kim. So today's topic is complex, but it's also essential. We are looking forward to some discussion, some information sharing, and please provide content-related comments and questions in the chat. We're going to look at some of the biggest challenges that come up with enforcing MPOs and CPOs, especially when those two systems overlap. And we're also going to be talking about really how to strengthen that collaboration across the fence lines. We're also going to share some practical strategies for starting and formalizing MOUs, even in places that don't have a nearby military installation. We also want to highlight shared responsibilities of judges, law enforcement, and military partners to really make sure survivors are protected. And finally, we will provide some concrete tools and tips that you can take back to strengthen your own cross-enforcement protocols. So again, a lot of information packed into today's session, but think of this as just a starting point. Our hope is really that this sparks new ideas and curiosity to learn and build those bridges in your own communities. Next slide. So before jumping in, we do have a few Menti questions to hear from you all. And to join, you can either scan the QR code or go to menti.com and enter the code 2582-4625. I will put that in the chat as well. And the first question we have for you today is, what word comes to mind when you think of military and civilian collaboration? And these responses are all anonymous, and maybe they include some of the challenges and or successes that you've experienced. Complicated, yes, thank you. Difficult, yes. Unclear. I want to validate all of these responses because yes, that is truth, and we hear that very often. Confusing. Red tape, yes. Lonely. Essential, thank you, yes. So regardless of the complication, the difficulty, the unclear, we hear you, we're here for you. And also, these are essential. So you can continue to add those or add them to the chat. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim for the next question.
Yes, thank you, Ava. The next question is, what is the military population like in your area? And do you have MOUs or other partnership agreements with your local military agencies? I know that the text is kind of small and hard to read here, so I will go ahead and copy that text in the chat for you. But we kind of just really want to know, what is it like in your area? Do you have a lot of MOUs? Do you have with large population of military individuals? Do you not have any military? Are you in a rural area? Or are you in an area where everybody knows that that base is in that city? And if that's the case, depending on what area you're in the military population, how many MOUs does your agency or does your court or does your organization have with those military bases? Yes, thank you, Emily, for introducing yourself. If you haven't done so, please feel free to do that in the chat. Just in case, I'm going to put the QR code back up there. I know it blocks some of the answers, but I'll remove the QR code in a moment. So you can join by going to Menti. So it looks like for those that have answered, we're kind of in the middle. We have someone that is at one of the more well-known military bases, but you're not really sure how many MOUs, which could make sense because there could be a lot, but there could not be that many. And then we have some average to smaller military populations, and you're not really sure, or there could be multiple. And you know, that's honestly the case where a lot of people aren't sure, or some people are very confirmed that there are a lot of MOUs, or they know there's not a lot, or maybe they haven't been updated. And so this is really key. And a lot of our points today is understanding what MOUs there are, why they're important, if they have been updated, why they need to be updated, why they need to be there, what needs to be in them. And we're going to talk about that today. So we've said military connected, I think maybe once, but when we talk about military connected survivors throughout our presentation, we really need to understand what military connected means. What is that term in reference to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking? And how does it relate to military protective orders, civilian protective orders, and the MOUs that we're going to talk about today? A military connected survivor is someone who is in active duty service in the National Guard, Reserves, who is a veteran, a civilian dependent, which could be an adult or a child, or an intimate partner, which is someone who is or has been in a social relationship or of romantic nature, who is a current or former spouse, or shares a child or a home with someone on the left-hand side of this list. And this is extremely important because a lot of times, I focus on intimate partners for moments because a lot of times military services, military programs, like for family advocacy, for domestic violence, sexual assault, those services and programs are not extended to intimate partners because they're not dependents. So someone may share a child with an active duty service member, and if there's domestic violence in the situation, if that person who shares a child with that active duty service member is not married, that person may not have access to services and programs from the military, and they rely heavily on community and civilian programs. And that's just one reason why MOUs are extremely important. And so when we talk about military connected survivors, we are talking about everyone here that you see on your screen. Here's your next question. Have you ever encountered a military connected survivor in your court or in your jurisdiction? Again, I'll put the QR code. Yes, no, or you're not sure. And that could be it could be a survivor, honestly, someone on either side of the courtroom. It looks like most of you have. That's great because we have more questions about what your experience was like. And so I'm really excited to see what some of those answers are. So we've said MOU, MPO, CPO, we've said what those acronyms are, but there are key definitions to discuss before we move on to what those specifics are of those acronyms. One is Memorandum of Understanding, which is a formal agreement between the Department of Defense and other agencies or organizations that outlines the roles, responsibilities, purpose, processes, and intended outcomes. Some people also call them Memorandum of Agreements, but often it's MOU. Then there's the Military Protective Order, which we'll talk what the specifics are, but it's an order issued by a commanding officer or a CO that restricts a service member from having contact with those person or persons identified in that order. And then there's a Civilian Protective Order, which is any injunction, restraining order, or other order issued by a civil or criminal court for the purpose of preventing violence or threatening acts or harassment. This slide, I think, helps a little bit better on this slide and the next one, helping to differentiate the MPOs and CPOs. So we're going to break them down just a little bit. Honestly, we have some tools that we'll share at the end that really help differentiate the MPOs and CPOs because it is one of our highly requested and downloaded tools because it is complex. And again, it is a reason why MOUs are important. MPOs are initiated by the commanding officer or the survivor or family advocacy advocate. The civilian protective orders, and again, we recognize that there are civilian protective orders, there are restraining orders, there's emergency protective orders. Because of different states, different jurisdictions, different levels, there are many different names, right? So when we say civilian protective orders, we want to be mindful of that. And we also want to be mindful of who they can be initiated by. Here it says survivor or a parent or guardian, but we also know that in some jurisdictions, it can also be initiated by law enforcement, even if the survivor doesn't want to initiate it. And so it's very important to understand just the complexity of how it could even be initiated. But it can only be issued by a commanding officer for a military protective order, whereas civilian is by a civil court. Where the enforcement is for military is within military installations and areas. And so essentially the easy way to say that is on base or within military areas, like military housing, but not off base. Civilian protective orders can be anywhere. So military law enforcement essentially can enforce civilian protective orders on base. Civilian law enforcement cannot enforce military protective orders. There are ways that they can help each other with, again, MOUs. Then there's a due process that happens differently with military protective orders and civilians. A commanding officer essentially immediately notifies the service member with the requirement of the survivor, without the requirement, of the survivor to show up in court. Whereas civilian protective orders, there's a service of process and generally a court hearing. again, dependent on jurisdiction and laws. With MPOs, I'm sure most of you are familiar with full faith and credit. It's not entitled. It's only enforceable by the commanding officer in military law enforcement because, again, MPOs aren't enforceable by civilian courts. CPOs are entitled to and is enforceable by all courts and law enforcement in all states, tribes, and U.S. territories. A key consideration with MPOs is that even if an MPO is ordered, that service member may still have access to their military issued firearms. There has to be a specific requirement that they have those taken away. And so when military, you talk about risk and lethality assessments, that is an increased risk for even if a military protective order is put in place. And with civilian protective orders, we also know that that can include firearm prohibitions, but it could not. Then there are violations that can happen when we know this. In a military protective order situation, it can result in military disciplinary actions under the UCMJ, but they are not considered criminal acts because it's under the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. For civilian protective orders, it can result in civil or criminal contempt and, of course, other legal penalties. So next question. Knowing what I just explained, and again, all of you that had answered saying that you have interacted or you have had somewhat a military connected survivor come across your courts or your agency, what would help you feel more confident about handling a case and that involved both an MPO and a CPO? Would it be a tool? Would it be more education? Would it be an MOU? Would it be collaboration? And you should be able to put more than one word. I think you can put like a short answer.
And as they're writing that, I just want to jump in to say, when you were talking about all the unclear, the confusion, the difficulty that we mentioned, or that you all mentioned in the first Mentee, what were some of those underlying issues that really caused those complications? So I do see a few coming in, and I'll jump back off.
Yes. So the MOU guidelines and known contacts. That's great. Yes. Knowing just who to call, right? Even if there was an identified person within the military law enforcement side and civilian law enforcement side, having a guru on each side could be, you know what, we're going to call this person. And within the court system could be helpful. Knowing again who to contact and getting a copy of the relevant order and what that process would look like. MOU specifying terms of interactivity. The roles and responsibilities, yes, and a collaboration. All these things are very common. What we hear, what would be helpful. Thank you.
And we have one more question for you all. What challenges have you observed, or do you believe military connected survivors experience when navigating protective orders? So as the victim survivor themselves, they're navigating these two systems. What are some of the challenges that you've observed?
If you haven't observed challenges for military connected survivors, what challenges do you think that they probably experience when navigating these different protective orders?
Thank you, Kim. And we have one: cross-jurisdictional recognition of the order, dissemination of the order, yes. Confusion, uncertainty of the process, the two systems, yes. Not understanding where to go or what protections they can get. Survivors are often in a trauma response, and navigating one system is hard enough, much less two. Yes, if that could be the quote up for this training, that is it right there. Also, we have they're dismissive to their situation, and police department is skeptical about who carries jurisdiction. Yes. Thank you for those responses. Again, you can continue to add to the chat to share with your other colleagues in the space. We'll move to the next slide. So a lot of what you just highlighted speaks to the very real challenges that military victim survivors face, not only in their everyday life choices, but especially when they find themselves caught between these two systems, right? And it's important for us to pause here because these challenges are not just abstract barriers, they're lived realities that really shape their safety, their access, and justice for these victim survivors. So some examples are listed here. Dual systems, double confusion. Survivors often have to navigate both civilian and military legal systems, as someone highlighted before. Each has different definitions, processes, and protections, and they can create a lot of confusion, even for us as professionals, let alone for someone in crisis. Limited legal knowledge and frequent moves because military families relocate fairly often and or their service member can deploy. I just realized I think I'm on the wrong slide. I'm so sorry. Let me go back. Okay. Oh, can you go back to the other slide? Thank you. We're having some tech difficulties. Thank you. I was like, that slide is not matching what I'm talking about. Okay, limited legal knowledge and frequent moves. Thank you, Kim. Because military families relocate fairly often and that service member can deploy for months at a time or away for training. So survivors may not have strong connections to local resources, and each new community comes with different laws and systems to learn. So that lack of continuity makes it much harder to know that protections are available and how to access them. So the complex order options, protective orders are another big source of confusion. Survivors may hear about MPOs, CPOs, emergency or temporary restraining orders, or no contact orders, which is a thing in the military. And again, each works differently. Understanding how or whether they overlap is challenging, especially again under that stress. So isolation on base, many military installations function almost like self-contained cities. And while that can create a strong sense of community, it can also cut survivors off from civilian advocacy services and other support services that they might otherwise turn to. We also have fear, stigma, and trust issues. Survivors may face fear of retaliation, unwanted involvement from the command, or they can be doubted, shamed, or blamed. And when you combine all of those fears with the stigma around reporting, it becomes clear why many survivors hesitate to seek help. Next slide. Can we actually go back? I'm sorry. For some reason, I'm out of order. Is it Monday? Disconnected. We'll go to disconnected. Thank you. And so as we shift the focus to the systems and professionals, military and civilian, it's important to start from a place of respect. So we know that you all care about survivor safety. And the challenges that we talk about today are about recognizing the barriers that can prevent us from doing our jobs effectively, especially when we're working across systems. So one of the first challenges is those inconsistent definitions. So many military and civilian systems, they often use and define intimate partner violence, domestic violence or abuse, sexual assault, stalking, and harassment differently. And that means what qualifies as a violation in one system may not necessarily be recognized in the same way in the other. And so again, a lot of confusion for the survivor, for professionals, and it can create barriers in providing consistent responses. So another challenge that we see is the fear of misstepping. Professionals on both sides, military and civilian, often want to do the right thing. They want to see that case through fruition, and they also don't want to step on each other's toes. And that hesitation, although it can come from a place of mutual respect, it can also, again, stem from confusion about the roles, the responsibilities, and jurisdiction. And again, that's valid. These systems are very complex. However, how can we work collaboratively to prevent this? Then we have the challenge of no clear protocols. So without the MOUs, MOAs that Kim mentioned, or cross-training, it's easy for agencies to assume that someone else is handling the follow-up or the enforcement. And we've heard over and over again that there's the assumption that the other side of the fence will handle it, or again, that fear of doing the wrong thing. So especially when there's no clear delineation of who has jurisdiction, who should be notified, or what enforcement options are available. We also have trust and respect. In some communities, we understand that both sides of the fence have developed strong partnerships and they work very closely together, which is great. However, in others, we must identify that there can be tension or a lack of collaboration that creates resistance. And from that survivor, that victim's perspective, that dynamic, whether it's positive or negative, it really has an impact on how safe and supported that they feel. So lastly, fragmented communication. Again, without these shared systems or established communication channels, key information is going to get missed. Things like the status of a protective order, or whether someone has been transferred or PCS to a different duty station, or even whether there's been a violation. These are all critical updates that can really easily fall through the cracks. And when they do, the victim survivors are often the ones impacted by the consequences. So we're going to skip 2 slides this time. Thank you. So let's quickly walk through a scenario together. I want you to imagine nearly 2 identical incidents of interpersonal violence. And the only difference is going to be that one happens on base in military housing and the other happens a few blocks away in town off base. So scenario A is on base. If the incident happens on base in military housing, this is a question for you all, you can just throw it in the chat. Who is going to respond most likely? You can take a guess if you don't know. MPs, thank you. Military police. Any other guesses? Who else should be responding? And if you don't know, that's okay. As 2 people said, CO potentially, depending, military police. So it's going to be, yes, military law enforcement and that military advocate if they have the 24/7 advocate. Oftentimes the installations do have that hotline as well. So in this case, the command can issue an MPO, but remember the MPO is not enforceable by civilian police off base. However, they can have understandings in place that if there's an MPO violation off base, if those relationships and MOUs are in place, the civilian police can notify military law enforcement. And this is also why we highly recommend that victims should also seek out a CPO. And also, depending on the installation location, say if this incident happened on base in military housing, but it happened in Japan or Germany, survivors may only have access to military supportive services. So how can we also make connections that they have community resources, even if it's in the US? So scenario B, same incident, a domestic violence incident happens off base in civilian housing. Who responds first? Y'all got this. Police department, thank you. Who else could respond? Might be a little similar to the other one, just not with military. So we have 2 that say police department, which is correct, civilian law enforcement, right? We want to be clear and clarify that. And also maybe a community advocate if they have those resources. And then potentially later on the court system. So the survivor can seek that emergency or temporary restraining order, maybe the CPO. And again, that difference, the CPO is going to be enforceable across the jurisdictions. Survivors should also have access to local shelters, court-based advocates, and other community services. And I also see crisis intervention. Thank you. So communication across the fence line, it's not going to always be guaranteed. Sometimes the civilian side assumes that military is handling things or vice versa. And that assumption can really leave survivors falling through the cracks with their supportive services and how they're followed up on. So as we all know, a survivor's safety should not depend on which side of the fence that they live on. And that's why, again, MOUs, MOAs, and collaboration are going to be so important. They create that shared response strategy making sure survivors don't face unnecessary risks simply because of their geography or their location. And I'll turn it over to Kim.
Yes, thank you, Ava, very much. And again, sorry about the technical difficulties. It's always fun. But one of the biggest myths that we hear, and not just from judges or court law enforcement, but really everybody working in supporting survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, is that, well, we don't have a base here. But it's really important to know that military connected survivors live everywhere. And in every zip code, every jurisdiction. In reality, National Guard and Reserve members, honestly, they also live everywhere. Survivors could be partners or dependents of service members, even in rural areas. And when something happens, they still need or may need that civilian protective order, that safety planning, and those referrals. Again, I also saw in the chat the crisis interventionist. Crisis responders may be needed. So if you're not sure whether a military connected survivor is someone that you're working with or that's coming to you for help and was in your courtroom, then you can ask the question, are you military connected? A lot of times we see in intake forms, or we see on paperwork or documents, even on legal protection orders, is this person active duty service member or veteran? What we recommend is asking, are you military connected? And then defining what military connected is, which is the definition we shared with you. This question can help identify military connected survivors, even in places where there's not that huge military base or a huge military presence. And you can build MOUs with other state military programs or National Guard programs or VA centers through your judicial counsel or attorney general's office to establish those shared expectations of how you will identify military connected survivors and how you're going to help them. So we have, again, those key points that are here. That one, military connected survivors live everywhere. Jurisdiction does not equal irrelevance, excuse me. You do not have to have a base nearby to encounter a survivor connected to the military. I'm not sure about Ava, but I know when I was in the military, so I went on 3 deployments, and every time I went on deployment, I knew multiple people who, when we went on deployment, their spouse or significant other, and even sometimes their children went to live somewhere else while they were on deployment, maybe back home, or they stayed with their family back home for long periods of time. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes that was in a very rural area. That person is still military connected. And so it doesn't matter where they are, they're always everywhere. And then also think about veterans. I live in a very, very, very small town in Texas. Not every veteran lives in a small town, but you have these military bases that may be in a big city, and those big cities could be surrounded by rural areas. So think of remote areas, and remote collaboration is extremely important. So think of some of the agencies listed here, like local VFWs, American Legions, again, the VA hospitals or clinics, National Guard armories, or even state military departments. But MOUs can also be statewide. And I want to provide this as an example of how you can do this, how you can make this happen. In 2003 in Anchorage, Alaska, they were Elmore Air Force Base and Fort Richardson received Department of Defense funding to establish a coordinated community response team to domestic violence. And what they did is they started informal with a 3-day conference and joint training sessions, and they shared a website for cross-agency resources, which I 100% understand. Stopping everything you're doing for 3 days would be difficult. It's not saying you're sending your entire staff, but sending a couple key people and sitting down for a day or 2 or 3 and saying, what are the processes we're using? Who is that point of contact? Almost everybody said, we need to know a point of contact. Who is going to be that person that we call? Who is going to be the one who sends the copies over? Who's going to be the person who sends the updates? What is the process going to be? Should we make a single page tip sheet of the different protection orders that we use in our jurisdiction so we can give it to victims and they can make a better informed decision that we can share with each other? having that is something that they did. They had joint training sessions. And then they transitioned into formal relationships through building those MOUs. So then survivors and providers across those systems could find relevant support much more easily. The civilian providers out in the community, like mental health providers, healthcare providers, law enforcement, social workers, victim advocates, they became much more aware of the military process, and military professionals also gained exposure to civilian advocacy. So they started to see those military and civilian partnerships. And so the housing example that Ava gave, with who do we contact? Well, if something happens out in town with a military connected survivor, they knew, oh, I could also probably call the military-based victim advocate, and also possibly keep that person's reporting options that person has in the military, which include confidential restricted reporting options, where there's not law enforcement involvement. And that's an option that they have. So the collaboration became much more sustainable and less dependent on individual personalities, and decreased the falling through the cracks that Ava was mentioning when there was things like turnover. So through all of this, why do MOUs matter? Which, all the points that we've shared, but it really formalizes those shared protocols. It ensures that the command is notified. Military protective orders are required to be entered into the National Crime Information Center. And so there is that command notification and also a civilian notification, but that doesn't mean it's going to pop up on everyone's screen. So that MOU can help with those notification and communications. It also establishes roles during incidents and improves survivor safety and just coordination throughout the entire case. So what are the 6 elements? And don't worry, we're not going to tell you these 6 elements and tell you to go make an MOU. We have a template for you. But of course, you want to outline the purpose. You want to outline why you're doing this and what is it going to be used for and what is the intent. You also want to identify the points of contact. And that doesn't always necessarily have to be the exact person's name. It could be a role. Who within your law enforcement agency, who within the courthouse is going to be designated as the person responsible for sharing military protective order and civilian protective order updates? The information sharing protocols, what that looks like. What are response timelines? What are joint training agreements? Are you going to have an annual, just 2-hour sit down and have joint training? And then what does that cross jurisdiction coordination look like? So we have a scenario for you. This is a scenario with sexual assault reporting at a civilian hospital. And we're going to go through some of these points briefly. And we have a couple other scenarios that we would like for you to take back to your team. But this one in particular, we want to review with you. First, a survivor requests a forensic exam, military connected survivor. The state mandates that the hospital notify law enforcement. There's no MOU. The hospital only notifies civilian police. So there's no military contact, there's no advocate, and there's no follow-up. The survivor's confused, they're unprotected, and they're unsupported. So knowing this, what do you think could have been done better? Who do you think should have been called? Does your jurisdiction have an MOU? Could have prevented some of the disconnects that happen here? What are your thoughts on this scenario? I know some of you may not live in a state where it's mandatory that they notify law enforcement. There are a few states that do.
And we're a small enough group today. If anyone just wants to come off chat and respond, come off mute and respond, you're welcome to do that, or place your answer in chat.
Thank you. Ava, have you ever had a situation happen like this?
Well, I was just thinking, so one thing that stands out. Okay, thank you. We have one person, MOU between forensic nursing and advocacy. Then law enforcement brings survivor to hospital for a forensic exam. And the nurses notify advocates to request an advocate to respond as well. That's a great response. And also we have survivor, victim advocate can reach out to base. Yes. So one thing I did want to point out that I've seen working on both sides of the fence lines is we do really highlight having these MOUs and MOAs, because I've seen that oftentimes law enforcement have great relationships, like military and civilian law enforcement, right? They have these relationships, but usually it's one or two detectives or sergeants. So what happens when that individual is on vacation, on leave, gets moves to a different jurisdiction or PCSs? So another reason is like, yes, relationships are a great starting point, but how do we formalize that? Because I've been talking to some law enforcement this last week and the military, they're like, oh yeah, we got it. We have these relationships, but it's one person. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what if it's not that one person that responds? So they may even be in the area, but if that one person doesn't respond to the case and they don't even hear about the case or know about the case, what is the protocol, right, in place, and who is that point of contact that they call on the base? So thank you for those that shared in the chat as well. This is exactly why those MOUs need to be in place. And knowing who to call, what office to call, what agency to call. And it's possible that the survivor maybe didn't want anyone to be called, but in that case, what would you do? Having these cross trainings, having these conversations, having these MOUs allow you to know what to do in those situations. You don't have to know every single policy for every agency in and out, but having these MOUs allow you to do the right steps and the correct steps, and also be survivor-centered and trauma-informed as well.
And if I could
So
add
again,
just one
yes,
thing,
go
I'm
ahead.
so sorry. You mentioned maybe the military victim survivor doesn't want the military to know, and that is valid. That's their choice, right? Something that the civilian community advocate can do is kind of be that liaison where maybe they're not reporting anything, but they're getting the resources through the military. They know the options that they can then tell the victim survivor without that victim survivor talking directly to the military.
Yeah, thank you. And we have a question in the chat. Can you address the restricted, unrestricted reporting provision that's part of the military process? How is that part of the option, and how does that complicate things? Yes, that is a great question. The military's restricted and unrestricted reporting process, essentially, military victims have the option, military adult victims have the option to report their sexual assault and domestic violence in the case of restricted or unrestricted reporting. Restricted reporting essentially means that they can receive medical care, mental health care, and they make a report. They sign a form, sexual assault, for example, a DD 2910, and they file this form. It stays with the sexual assault office through a program called DSAD. But essentially they're filing this report and they're just saying, I want to make this report that this happened to me, but it's essentially confidential. It does not involve law enforcement. It does not inform their chain of command. There's not an investigation, but it allows them to get services that they need. Now, they can actually still, in this case, this scenario, that survivor doesn't necessarily have to have a report to go get a forensics exam. They have the right to go get medical care, but they're making a restricted report to make the official report that something happened to them. An unrestricted report means that law enforcement is going to be contacted. The chain of command does get a notification that a report is being made. That does not disclose all the details of the case, but that a report has been made and there's going to be possibly an investigation initiated. Once a report is unrestricted, you, of course, cannot make it be restricted. If you file a restricted report at a later date, you can choose to make it go unrestricted. But how this complicates things is if law enforcement out in town responds in this scenario to the hospital and finds out that there is a military connected survivor who does have the option to file a restricted report, and they start talking to this victim and getting information, they really don't have that option anymore. It's going to be an unrestricted report. And so that in this scenario, if the victim advocate in the military wasn't contacted to help maintain those reporting options, then essentially they're mandatory reporters in the case of having to report. And like it says here, the state mandates the hospital notify law enforcement. For this particular state, law enforcement takes that report, and now law enforcement is aware. So that person does not have that restricted reporting option. And that can really complicate things. So you can actually take away some of their reporting rights and reporting options, which can be really traumatizing and re-victimizing for that victim. So again, I mentioned we do have some scenarios you can take back to your team and share with them. And I just briefly want to mention, this is a case where Kimmy Holt she was experiencing domestic violence over a period of time with her partner, who was a veteran and was experiencing some challenges trying to receive help, but there was not a lot, really any law enforcement arrests from the offender. And so she did not have that kind of to help her get a protective order, but she was able to express what was happening and express the abuse that she was experiencing. So she was granted a protection order. And in that protection order, there was, the risk of firearm use because of things that were happening with his mental health, with the kind of abuse she was experiencing. And so he was ordered to surrender his firearms. And, it's great that in the judicial system, she was able to receive that protection order, essentially first time requesting it. Unfortunately, when he was notified the next day, Kimmy Holt was approached by him at her house, and he ended her life and then ended his own life. And so it's really important to understand the dynamics of what services are available. We're not really aware of the services that was available to her as a military connected survivor of domestic violence. He was a veteran, but she was a military connected survivor. And having understanding of, she went to the civilian side to get help, which was great. And she got that help. But having multiple systems working together and collaborating is something that we really stress, and being able to support military connected survivors everywhere.
Thank you, Kim. And that case is such a great reminder that we have all this good content, we have this information discussions, but remembering to put the faces and names to who this is directly affecting is so important. So thank you. So this slide is really about being proactive instead of reactive. When we're supporting military connected victims, the gaps in communication and coordination don't just cause confusion for us as professionals. Again, that's safety risk for victims. So when we talk about protocols, the key is to answer questions before they come up. Who gets the first call when a victim reports at the hospital, to police, or when filing a protective order? And how do we handle mandatory reporting, just as Kim was saying earlier in that scenario, when a victim is military connected? Survivors should walk away with consistent resources no matter where they disclose, which is why joint planning and training across systems is so important. We also need clarity on that follow-up piece. Who checks in and makes sure that they don't fall through the cracks? And also we have veteran treatment courts. These cannot be overlooked. Victims connected to court-involved veterans must be included in safety planning. Having these pieces mapped out in advance really ensures that survivors are supported every step of the way. So when we say answer the questions before they're asked, what we mean is don't wait for these situations to create confusion and for there to be gaps. Really map them out in advance, write them down, and solidify through MOUs and protocols. We're going to keep hitting home on that. Also, train on them so that when a survivor does need our services, does report to one of these agencies, those systems are ready and the victim isn't the one paying the price for our confusion or our uncertainty. Next slide. So one more question for you, a multiple choice. It states, which of these would make collaboration easier in your jurisdiction? I will repost that code if you are disconnected. And our response options, knowing who to call, formal MOU, regular case staffing, joint training, or other. And if you choose other, feel free to put it in the chat. All right, formal MOUs. I can't see that first option. There we go. Knowing who to call and joint training. Really, all of these could be significantly, yes, thank you, Sandy, very beneficial to our collaboration and making it easier for all of us to respond. Next slide. So when we think about MOUs, the key is to remember that, again, they're not just pieces of paper, they're reflections of real working relationships. And that's the best way, is to build them, to start simple, start that conversation, build the relationships with regular check-ins, joint case reviews, those informal touch points that really build trust and make it easier to talk about formal agreements later on. Shared priorities, both military and civilian partners really care about the safety, risk reduction, and accountability. And if we keep those common goals front and center, then MOUs become about teamwork and not just complying to an order or piece of paper. So third is use a template as a starting point. So we will offer a template towards the end of these slides. You can use sample templates from other communities that are working successfully. And those really help reduce the hesitation and gives everyone a concrete starting point. Also, making it mutual, build in benefits like resource sharing, training opportunities, and clear shared responsibilities that really balances out the responsibilities and makes people more invested. And again, don't wait for a crisis. The time to put the agreements in place is before the emergency, when partners are thinking clearly and we can negotiate in good faith. And whatever you create, always include clear contact protocols. Again, if that person is not responding the same every time, if someone's out on leave or vacation, who notifies whom and when? So again, survivors don't get lost between the systems. So in short, start with the relationships, focus on shared responsibilities, and put clarity on paper before you need it. That's how you create MOUs that really work. Next slide. So operating in silos, the consequences. So we've discussed a few consequences already. We discussed that case. When the systems don't communicate or work together, again, those consequences can be serious. And if agencies don't share that information, again, warning signs will slip through the cracks. Survivors may have to reach out to multiple entities multiple times or be contacted by multiple agencies without that trauma-informed coordination. Incomplete risks or lethality assessments without the full picture of risk factors and potential for lethality, key details get missed, like prior threats, access to weapons, or escalating behavior. If you have MDTs, HRTs in your jurisdiction, multidisciplinary teams, high-risk teams, these are ways to really respond and reduce lethality. Also, we have potential outcomes, homicide, suicide, child endangerment. Oftentimes when MPOs and CPOs are put in place, this increases the risk factors, increases risk of lethality. How are we then making protocols and processes across the CCR, across our collaborative teams to really address those challenges? Next slide. And what's next? So where do we go from here? The first step is to look at your own systems. Ask yourself, do you have a referral list that includes military aware providers? Do you know which agencies in your community, both military and civilian, you should have an established MOU with? So start by building that list. Don't just stop there. Invite those agencies to the table. For example, our next training we have is building sustainable CCRs with courts and military partners. So making sure that those key stakeholders are in the room, and that's how we really begin to expand partnerships across both systems. Second, remember that this is ongoing work. Keep learning and building the bridges, and keep sharing what you learned here today with your own teams. The more we grow in our shared knowledge and relationships, the stronger that our coordinated community responses become. And finally, don't hesitate to seek out continued training and technical assistance. None of us have all the answers, but we can have active discussion and group think and creativity to problem solve some of the gaps that are in our communities. We can build those responses that really are sustainable, survivor-centered, and truly collaborative. So key takeaways, meaningful change really does start with small intentional steps, assessing our own systems, and expanding our networks and committing to that ongoing growth.
Thank you, Ava. And I noticed we have a couple questions in the chat. Is it possible to have the ability for civilian advocates to request a military incident police report included in an MOU? Not having access to collect a record of history of domestic violence seems to be a big barrier for many of our survivors. Military protective orders and those records are not as accessible in public as civilian protective orders can be. And so not necessarily will you have access to that. Now, again, every state and jurisdiction and laws are different in every area. And so if you were to have your team sit down, have lawyers in your area, have the judges, sit down, law enforcement in your area, maybe there is access to that. And so in your MOU, that's something you could write in your MOU, is that this is something that we could have access to, and maybe it's redacted. Maybe that's part of the notification, right? Every time that something is violated, or there is, in addition to the public record, if there is this, within the military record, but with it being military records, it is going to be extremely limited, if anything.
If I may add to a really great point here, is that if the community advocates are in discussion with the military advocates, the military victim can do a release of information, and that military advocate can share information with the community advocate if the victim allows, or vice versa. Another thing that can be shared if you can't get a specific military incident report is the risk factors, or if there was a lethality or risk assessment done. If those can be shared with the community in order to get the CPO, that can be beneficial as well.
Yeah, thank you. And then another question: due to the complexity and heartbreak of such incidents, what do you say about contacting media just as ongoing long-term public response? How is this helpful, and how does it hurt? If you're talking in response, if you're referring to like MOUs and partnerships and you working together, or after a case had happened, if you don't mind clarifying exactly what you're talking about, because I want to be able to answer that correctly. But we'll answer that. We'll come back to that question. And then you also mentioned local state child welfare involvement is crucial for the kids and can help long-term partnerships. Yes, 100%. Military connected children, and even a school, right? If there's a school liaison, particularly on base, that can be extremely helpful. And then the school liaison that's out in the public with the public schools or community schools could be extremely helpful. And then you stated there can be statewide MOUs with states and even cities having multiple law enforcement entities and military organizations. Is there a way to have more of an umbrella MOU instead of so many individual ones? You can have an umbrella MOU, and then within the state, and more of a state one to be coordinating training, right? Or coordinating access to certain services, or coordinating information sharing. But really within the area, the services and the programs, when you're trying to directly support military connected survivors within your area, you are going to have probably one or two or just maybe 3 MOUs, because you're trying to operate as a coordinated team. So you're bringing those key players to one table. and trying to really have that one kind of big MOU, that umbrella MOU for all of you to work together to coordinate the process of this is what happens when a survivor experiences this. And you can't cover every situation, but it's really about identifying who those contacts are, what the common processes look like, and who is going to do updates, who is going to provide certain services and programs, who can provide what kind of information. And so you're, again, answering those questions before they come up.
Yes, and if I may add too, so working with some installations now that are in jurisdictions with tons of civilian law enforcement, there can be that umbrella MOU, like Kim was saying, which is kind of just the overarching training requirements or connections and relationships. But because of the individual processes and protocols of each civilian department and jurisdiction, it really is highly recommended to get an MOU with each of those individual agencies. And I know that's going to be a ton more work and more frustrating headache, but definitely highly recommend that.
Yeah. Thank you, Ava. And so we'll cover the last couple slides. So thank you for staying with us for the last 15 minutes, and we'll come right back to the questions. So the organizational self-assessment, this is our tool for all organizations, and it's a great tool to use. You can download it or click the link in the slides. And I'll also put this link in the chat, but I know you're going to have access to these slides. But essentially, this is asking, are you ready and are you prepared to support military connected survivors? And what are your strengths? And also, what are your areas for improvement? And you can come to contact us and say, hey, we're actually not very prepared for this, or this is something we need help on, and we can help you. We provide, support in those areas. And then of course you have NCJ, FCJ as well. But it's really important to identify what areas you are strong at and how you can help the other community agencies in your area build their strength, and then what areas you can have improvement on. This is a toolkit for serving survivors of domestic abuse, and it also outlines a lot of specific information on MPOs and CPOs. So it is a great tool, and it includes a chart as well of MPOs and CPOs. So I highly recommend that as well. And this is your MOU template. It is a Google document, and so you can, it's not editable until you download it. So download it and feel free to share it and adapt it specifically to your organization. It is derived from a DoD instruction, and so it is similar to a military document. And you can use it for military partnerships and civilian partnerships. But it's meant to be detailed, and it's meant to, try to cover essentially all of your bases. So we want to know what is something that you will do differently after today's session. Something that that hopefully we've prompted you, some action we've prompted you to take. And I'll put the QR code up there one more time. Better establishments of MOU with partners. Okay. It's tough. It's tough to get everybody together. We recognize that. It's not easy. But it's also tough spinning your wheels. It's also tough trying to figure out who's who and who's to contact, and spending, running around, and also seeing survivors struggle, and them having to go to, different doors, and not being the right door. And really having that intentional, deliberate time to sit down, figure out who's who, what's the purpose, what can we do, what can we not do, what should we be doing, what should we not be doing, and getting it down on paper and sharing that so everybody's on the same page. Definitely in smaller communities, thank you. Talking with team leadership to evaluate where as an agency we stand with this process collaboration between systems, maybe improve communication protocols. It's great, thank you. See if there's an MOU, and if not, then get one. Review MOU templates and other resources that we've provided, and then consider having a conversation with law enforcement victim assistance units to work towards creating an MOU to better assist clients. This is all great, and we're very excited and happy to hear this. And remember that we're here to help. We are here through like technical assistance options. We're here to provide tools and guides. We do communities of practice. You have your National Resource Center, a military connected family and courts bench card, and tools from NCJ, FCJ. You know, it's not necessarily to throw all these PDF documents and tools at you, but it's these even the self-assessment. If you were to start there and identify, what do we need help on? Where can we start? Starting there and having direction on where to go can help you identify what is the first step. And so I want to go to back to this question about the media. And so the media angle potentially too salacious to be helpful, or does it spur overreaction and or circling wagons to protect agencies rather than address the victim issues? Honestly, that is a complex question because it depends on the situation. It depends on what is the military environment, what in the area, what is the civilians' perception of the military environment. Have you been working together, military and civilian? What's the community's perception of that? If let's take for example, if you have a military, average sized military community in an area and the community is average size, but they really haven't been working together. And after this training, you're going to go back, your community advocate, maybe your law enforcement or your judge, or your community victim advocate, and you want to start building that relationship. You want to connect with the military base, connect with other victim advocates or other community agencies in your area, but you don't know how to do that. And also you don't know how your community feels about that. And you also don't want to be seen that you're just going to send everyone to the base for help. What you can do is you can present that you are trying to take really a no wrong door approach, and you're trying to build an MOU. You're trying to ensure that survivors can get trauma-informed, military-informed help wherever they decide to go, and that you are trying to be better across, that you're trying to receive cross-training across jurisdictions, but also across military and civilian systems. So all of you can better support survivors at different points of their experiences. And of course, make sure that you're following laws, but also ensuring that they're receiving not just the support, but that they're receiving all of their rights and access to services. And that's a tool that you can use in the community. And if you start with those conversations, then if something does happen, you've already started talking to the community. You've already also hopefully started listening to your community. And then you probably have a better answer to that question. And go to the next slide. So of course we have our next trainings. Like Ava said, I really highly recommend inviting some of these people. Take the MOU template and go to some of these people. Hey, have we ever done this? Why don't we have this? Do we have this? Let's update it. Come to this next training and invite them to the next training, because we are going to talk about how do you start building that CCR response with courts and military partners, and how do you start working together. If an MPO is handed down and now that victim is going to go out in town and also request a CPO, what does that look like? If a MPO is violated maybe out in the community, but it can't really enforce it by civilian law enforcement, what can that civilian law enforcement officer do? Who can they contact? Can they detain that person, that service member for military law enforcement? What does that look like? What does your MOU say? How do you work together to answer some of those questions? And so invite those people to the next training so you can start to generate ideas, and so we can be there to support you. And then this is our contact information. We do have a website coming soon with a lot of information and our QR code. And then we'll also put our email. There are, I see a survey. There's also another survey here, but please take, preferential NCJ, FCJ survey, which they have put in the chat. And we will also put our email in the chat as well. See. But we'll see if there are any questions. And as Sherry said, if you would like to come off mute or add any questions to the chat, we'll be happy to answer them as well.
I was also thinking to go back to that media question just for a moment. It would be great if there was a media story on how well the community and military were working together, with their MOUs and how can we model this community because they're doing so well. So hope and dream here.
We definitely appreciate all of your time and attention. It is complex, and like some of you had mentioned, just it can be very difficult for the survivor to navigate. It's difficult for us to navigate, for you to navigate, law enforcement, courts, to navigate two completely different systems, right? You have the UCMJ, which is essentially the legal system of the military, and then you have the civilian legal system. And so a survivor can essentially be trying to do both. Oh, I see we have someone raise your hand. Christopher, do you want to come off mute?
Sure. This is Chris Arnold at the United States Department of Defense State Liaison Office. I just want to thank you all so much for this really amazing presentation. For those on the call that don't know, we manage state government relations for the Office of the Secretary of Defense on personnel and readiness issues, and work with state policymakers to change laws with respect to states' response to interpersonal violence, child abuse and neglect identification and reporting, concurrent jurisdiction over juveniles. And we work closely with Cherie and her team at NCJ, FCJ. So I would love to extend an invitation to all of you to attend our annual workshop in September. So I'm going to follow up with you after the call. And this webinar really has to be, honestly, not only from my office required viewing, but throughout PNR. I think that the whole Secretariat really needs to hear what you guys have said today, because we were just talking to a state judge advocate. I won't blow up the state, but he said, well, we don't have any equity in MPOs. We don't report that to the NICIC, no, actually, the MCIO, they do, right? It has to, commander puts it out. It's got to be issued in 7 days. And that's for a whole state. The level of awareness is not where it should be. So I just really want to say, this is one of the best webinars I've ever been on. So you guys did a great job, and thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. We really appreciate that. And, there will be a recording and we'll have the slides sent out, and we're happy, to talk with you afterwards if you would like us and Sherry to continue to share this information, because we do see it. We do see the gap, but we definitely appreciate those words very much. And thank you.
I just want to echo everything that Christopher said and really thank Ava and Kimberly. This information has been so valuable, and we're really looking forward to and hoping that everyone joins us back in November for the next webinar in the series with NOVA. But we really appreciate everyone's time today. You can see in the chat we have a link to the survey. NOVA has a survey. You only have to do one. We'll combine our responses. Also, if you need documentation of continuing education, please email us. Questions, requests for training, or technical assistance, please feel free to contact NOVA directly or NCJ, FCJ, and we will obtain the information from Christopher for the September event, and we will email that to everyone who participated in the webinar today. As it was said, the webinar is recorded. It will be up on our resource center in a couple of days, and also the NCJ FCJ YouTube channel. And please feel free to share it widely and broadly. We would appreciate it. So thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.